Hello and welcome to a special PJTV interview. I'm Tony Katz.
And I'm Stephen Cruiser. The 2012 GOP field is starting to take shape. PJTV has already brought you interviews with contenders Herman Cain, Governor Tim Pawlenty, and former Speaker Newt Gingrich, and possible candidate Representative Michelle Bachmann.
And today we are proud to have in studio the former governor of New Mexico and 2012 presidential contender, Gary Johnson. Sir, an absolute pleasure. How are you?
Mine. Thank you very much.
You can shake Stephen Cruiser's hand too. It's quite acceptable. It's good to have you here. Start off with some basics. People compare you very often to Ron Paul, the libertarian leanings. As a matter of fact, you endorsed Ron Paul in 2008, and here you are in 2012 running against Ron Paul. If people are of that mindset, why you and not Ron?
You know, I'm not the person to answer that question. Perhaps the American electorate listening to this in stereo will be inclined to listen a little more closely. And this is a movement that needs to grow. I happen to think that I speak on behalf of the majority of Republicans, but I'm putting that to the test right now, and it is a contest. If Republicans don't have me as a checkoff, why maybe they check off a name that doesn't necessarily represent their views to the rest of the world.
But there's not a clear delineation between the politics you espouse and the politics that someone you've endorsed, Ron Paul, espouses?
You know, there may be differences, but I would just as soon not even mention them in the context that it is about freedom, it is about liberty, and the notion that you've got two candidates up there talking about those phenomenon, or what I think this country was based on, that's a good thing.
Governor, in foreign policy, you state on your website that you believe that troops should be out of Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and we should be discussing the placement of troops around the world. And then this, quote, individuals detained by the U.S., whether it be at Guantanamo Bay or elsewhere, must be given due process via the courts or military tribunals and must not be held indefinitely without regard to those fundamental processes. In light of this, do you believe that we should close Guantanamo?
Well, there may be, first of all, we should close Guantanamo for the reasons of endless detainment without being charged. We should close Guantanamo to the notion that anybody is subject to torture of any sort. That being said, maybe there's a cost-benefit analysis to actually have Guantanamo open from the standpoint of when we process these individuals. I'm not aware of what those reasons are, but the reasons for shutting Guantanamo are those first two reasons.
Do you favor military tribunals?
I think there's a fairness to that, that we're subjecting our own military to, and that they are in fact fair, and these are enemy combatants, they're non-U.S. citizens, so I think there's a real case to be made that military tribunals really do serve a fair function. Okay,
and a very important question in light of recent events, would you have given the order to kill bin Laden?
Would I? Yes, I would have.
Okay.
Yes, I think that's why we went into Afghanistan to begin with, that it was Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, that's who we are at war with, that we should remain vigilant to that threat. But Afghanistan, you know, originally I supported the military action in Afghanistan, but I thought that after 6 months we'd had effectively taken out Al-Qaeda, and that we should get out, that we should have gotten out 10 years ago. But here it is, we're there 10 years later. I think the worst part about it all is that, of course, men and service women are dying, and that we're building roads, schools, bridges, highways, and hospitals in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're borrowing 43 cents out of every dollar to do that. We're borrowing money from China and paying interest on money that we're giving away.
Let me stay at least in the general area and move to the Middle East. The president yesterday has what he's calling a policy speech on the Middle East and on Israel, and advocates for the return of Israel to 1967 borders. And there's some debate pre or post, but it wouldn't matter because a pre-1967 border is not even an actual border. He says this is going to bring about a lasting peace with Palestinians. Do you believe that it will bring about a lasting peace with Palestinians? And is this a plan you support? And if not, what are your thoughts on how the U.S. should be dealing or speaking or engaging with Israel?
Well, so having made a couple of trips to Israel doesn't make me an expert in any way whatsoever. Having spoken to Netanyahu for over an hour on one of those trips, to Shimon Peres, to Ariel Sharon, having spoken to those individuals, I think that it's wrong for Americans to even think that we're going to tell Israel what's in Israel's best interests. I do believe that we should maintain a military alliance with Israel, that is key, and that it will be key into the future. But I would have always said that for us to presume that we know best when it comes to Israel is just wrong-headed, and we shouldn't be engaged in that conversation.
But the president now puts forth a policy that says we know best when it comes to Israel.
Well, so status quo, without criticizing Obama, this is what we do when it comes to foreign policy, regardless of who's in office, and that there's unintended consequences that go along with what it is that we do from a foreign standpoint. We take out Saddam Hussein, and he's the check when it comes to Iran. And now Iran may end up, it is not a military threat currently. It may end up being, and
You
we
don't
should
believe Iran is a military threat as it stands?
As it stands. That isn't to say that we shouldn't be vigilant to what might end up to be a military threat, but it's a military threat, or it has the capability of doing that because of our actions taking out Saddam Hussein, Iraq being the check against Iran. Iran was absolutely concerned with Iraq. That was their concern. Now that Iraq's been taken out of the equation, they're raising their head. Unintended consequence of government.
On to a more generic kind of campaigning question right now. Some people are saying that one of the biggest rivals has already imploded. Newt Gingrich said the Paul Ryan plan was right-wing social engineering. What do you make of Speaker Gingrich's week in general, and that phrase, his choice of words there specifically?
You know, I'm not the guy to talk to when it comes to criticizing my opponents. I really believe that there's a status quo to this. I really believe that Republicans and Democrats both share in where we've come to financially in this country, which is bankruptcy, which is being on the verge of a financial collapse. And that for the most part, we just keep electing the same people over and over and over again, one senator, congressperson, president at a time, and not that much changes. So I ran 2 campaigns for governor where I did not mention my opponent in print, radio, or television, because I'm under the belief that people really want to vote for ideas for somebody as opposed to the lesser of two evils. So,
to which I would agree with you with that quite a bit, but I think everybody's been kind of mystified by this phrase right-wing social engineering all week, as if moving something from a government-supported model to a more private sector model is somehow some diabolical, conservative, and weird social engineering thing.
So on the notion of Paul Ryan's plan, you know, it's definitely in the right direction, absolutely in the right direction. What I've been proposing very simply is and I hate to use the term cut, because cut implies that there's going to be this reduction in goods and services, but if we don't cut, the important thing to point out, I think, is we're going to be left with nothing.
Okay.
So isn't it better to have a safety net? Isn't it better to be delivering health care services to those over 65?
As governor of New Mexico, you cut taxes 14 times in the state, and you left New Mexico with a surplus. So it would seem to me that cutting is something you know how to do very well. How do you do that now? If it's not the Paul Ryan plan, what is the plan?
Well, I would suggest when it comes to Medicare that the federal government cut Medicare by 43%, block grant the states a fixed amount of money, 43% less than what we're currently spending, and give health care to those. I advocate that for both Medicaid and Medicare. Block grant the states 43% less, 50 laboratories of innovation, the states, all engaged in this notion of best practices. There would be best practices. There would be failure. Failure would get avoided. Best practices would get emulated.
Let me do the follow-up on that, if I can. You're very big on entitlement reform. It is on your website that you want to repeal Obamacare, and I want to know if you mean defund or repeal, and that you believe there should be you would block grant Medicare funds to the states. But for those of us who are in the layman world, what does that specifically and actually mean?
So what that specifically means is that all I have is my resume. All I have is my experience as governor of New Mexico. So as governor of New Mexico, Medicaid was a fee-for-service model in New Mexico. I had an insurance policy as governor of New Mexico. What if we gave every single Medicaid recipient in New Mexico my health insurance policy? We did the math. It was pretty simple to do. Would we really save 25% by doing that? Giving them my health insurance policy and paying for that premium for everyone? Yes, we did. And that's exactly what we did. And that's exactly the amount of money that we saved. So if Medicaid, if the federal government would have given Medicaid completely to the states, taken away all the strings, all the mandates, and said, you have to do this for 43% less, me having done it for 25% less, I could have made it happen. If Medicare were given to the states, Medicare is a fee-for-service model nationally. It's pay as you go. Submit a bill, you get reimbursed. If I were to have been given Medicare, I could have folded that into the managed care model that we had for Medicaid and saved 25%.
So you're
and done a better job of delivering the services for that much less money.
You're talking about removing the federal bureaucratic red tape and nightmare to make it functional.
Well, and let's go beyond that, though. Let's go to the notion that the federal government knows best, that one size fits all, when we have the opportunity.
Are you saying they don't?
No, I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to say that. I didn't want you to miss. So the notion of 50 states engaged in best practices to deliver health care to the poor and those over 65 would result in best practices. It would happen, as opposed to one size fits all. You know what? One size doesn't fit all. And as a matter of fact, it is so tight that I can't even breathe.
Steven.
Let's go to the $64,000, which in today's terms would probably be $627 trillion question. What would you do to bring back jobs?
I would eliminate the corporate income tax. I think that eliminating the corporate income tax, understanding that it is a double tax, understanding that this is how corporations have been treated in this country originally, which was no tax. When you and I, as owners of the corporation, get money distributed to us from the corporations, at that point, that's when the money gets taxed. Do away with the corporate income tax. I think that you reestablish this country as the only place to grow, startup, nurture business. I think that would result in the creation of tens of millions of jobs immediately.
Not to downplay the importance that drugs are in America, and not to downplay the importance or the near insanity of the amount we spend on fighting the drug war in America and incarcerating people for drugs in America, you are in favor of the decriminalization of marijuana. Is that still part of your policy, and is there a specific reason for it?
Yeah, and it's not, I'm not a decriminalization advocate. I'm a legalization advocate, because decriminalization, I think, turns its back on half the problem, which is being able to sell it. And the majority, we have 2.3 million people behind bars in this country right now, which is the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. China, which is a communist authoritarian dictatorship, has 4 times the population as that of the United States, and they have 1.5 million people behind bars. Wait a minute. Shouldn't they have 20 million people behind bars as opposed to less than we do?
Well, it could be that it's easier to get drugs in America, and there are too many bloggers in China.
So back to your issue. The majority of those people in this country are behind bars because they've sold small amounts of drugs on numerous occasions and been caught doing it. Mandatory sentencing.
So your push for legalization extends only to marijuana and not to cocaine, heroin, et cetera?
Right.
Or is this
only to marijuana. But when it comes to all the other drugs, I advocate harm reduction strategies, the things that we really care about, which is reducing death, disease, crime, corruption. in a nutshell, it's looking at the drug problem first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. I say we legalize marijuana, and this country takes giant steps forward regarding what I would describe as harm reduction strategies, and this notion drugs should be treated as a health issue first.
And then you make the case that there's tax revenue that can be gotten from that too.
Well,
right? Isn't that a huge part of it?
Well, it's not to downplay any part of it, but it's estimated that by taxing marijuana at a 50% rate, still reducing the cost of marijuana by 90% from what current prices are, that you would generate between $7 and $11 billion a year annually. That's no small figure. I think more importantly is the redirection of $70 billion of expenditure when it comes to half of this is staggering to me, half of law enforcement, half the courts, and half the prisons is drug-related. And to what end? 1.8 million arrests every single year.
Yeah. I'm a native Arizonan, and I've spent my entire life living close to this border. You were a border state governor. The president recently went to El Paso and joked about having a moat there, and he seems to always be taking this a little too lightly. Well, if you were president, let me put it bluntly, would you build the damn fence?
No, I would not.
Okay.
I think that building the fence, I think that putting the National Guard arm in arm across 2,000 miles of border would be a whole lot of money spent with no benefit
You favor
whatsoever.
electronic surveillance?
I wouldn't advocate backing away from what we're currently doing, but I think you dry up the traffic by making it as easy as possible for an immigrant that wants to come into this country to get documented, to get a work visa. A work visa would not be citizenship. It wouldn't be a green card, permanent non-resident status, but it would be a work visa that would entail a background check and a Social Security card so that applicable taxes would get paid. With regard to the 11 million illegal immigrants that are here in this country right now, I think we need to set up a grace period where they can get a legal work visa, background check, Social Security card. I think the problem in the 80s when Reagan set up his period of amnesty was that he coupled that with the government being in charge of quotas, matching up businesses that needed workers with workers that wanted to come into this country. And immediately when they did that, that began the breakdown of government doesn't do a very good job of doing that. So get government in the business of issuing work visas in a line that's moving. If you do that, I think that you effectively dry up those that cross the border illegally.
This is something I don't completely disagree with you on that, but I don't understand how making the path easier for people to get here tightens up the porousness of a border that allows violent criminals to operate almost with impunity, especially in southern Arizona.
Well, so actually, I think we're in total agreement here. You can't get a work visa. You can't get a work visa, and yet you know that if you can get across the border, even illegally, that you'll get a job. And so much of what is happening on the border right now, so much of the violence, so much of the crime has to do with drugs. Legalize marijuana and arguably 75% of the border violence with Mexico goes away because that's the estimate of the Mexican drug cartel's activities that are engaged in the marijuana trade.
Governor, I have to disagree with you. That becomes a cart-horse conversation. If we legalize the drugs, then we don't have this problem. In the meantime, David Hartley is still dead on Falcon Lake. In the meantime, we do have a massive drug problem and a human trafficking problem coming across from Mexico, especially through places like Arizona. Isn't there a value to, while we're still going to have a massive moral and cultural debate about legalizing of drugs, that we build a fence to at least protect the citizens who want to live free?
Look, you know, on one hand, what I'm hearing the two of you say is that government, and maybe I'm not catching this, but that government, there are unintended consequences of government when it comes to drug policy, that there are unintended consequences of government when it comes to big business and picking winners and losers. But the government's going to do a good job erecting a fence and securing the borders? I got to tell you, I don't think it's going to work.
Let them stay out of it. Let Arizona do their job.
Well, let Arizona do their job. So in that context, 50 laboratories of wanting to do a better job, Arizona, have at it.
So now we do understand your conversation is not about it being done. It's about who does the doing.
Well, if Arizona chooses to go about it in that way, then Arizona have at it. I don't think it's going to work.
Governor Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today. To learn more about Gary Johnson, check out his website, GaryJohnson2012, 2012.com. Thank you so much, sir. For the great Stephen Cruiser, I'm Tony Katz. Thanks for watching.